All righty, we are recording now. So we are going to sing the Sea of Galilee song. I've been hearing good things from people about learning this song and that you guys like it and that you're getting really, really good at it. So get your fingers all warmed up. We'll go a little bit slow so everybody can learn the motions. And then when we get to the end, we'll go real fast because that makes it lots of fun. Is everybody ready? There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a sea. There's a sea. There's a Sea of Galilee. There's a boat on the Sea of Galilee. There's a boat on the Sea of Galilee. There's a boat. There's a boat. There's a boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are men, there are men. There are men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are hands on the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are hands on the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are hands, there are hands, there are hands on the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are nets. That's like I'm holding my net with my hands. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are nets. There are nets. There are nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. There are fish. There are fish. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat on the Sea of Galilee. All right, that's all the motions, so we're going to do it fast. Are you ready? Here we go. See if you can keep up. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. There are fish. There are fish. There are fish in the nets in the hands of the men in the boat in the Sea of Galilee. Woohoo! Good job. I can see people keeping up and doing all those motions. That's awesome. Okay. You can unmute now if you want to. Just remember that you need to be really quiet unless you're answering a question, because all of the talking, all of the background noise and everything picks up on the microphones and gets in our speakers, and it can make it hard for people to hear. So remember to be very quiet. If there's background noise at your house, just stay muted until you get ready to answer a question and unmute just for that, so it won't mess up everybody else being able to hear. Okay. Nobody else trying to come in yet, so we will go ahead and get started. We sing that song about the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus taught lots of stories and lessons around the Sea of Galilee. Some of his followers were fishermen. We talked about them a couple of weeks ago, and they would have used their fishing boats on the Sea of Galilee. So we'll just keep on singing that song for a few more weeks till we've really got it down good and we're done with the stories about Jesus. Now these lessons, our bulletin board said, let's go. So where are we going to go? If we're saying let's go, what are we going to go do?
To Jesus.
Right, we want to go to Jesus. We want to learn to be Jesus followers. And Jesus was teaching his followers how to be like him. And it's really important to follow Jesus because our Bible verse actually tells us one reason it's so important. We'll go ahead and do our Bible verse right now so it'll be in our mind. Our Bible verse tells us that Jesus is the way that we get to God, and he's the only way to get there. So I'm going to say it, And you can say it after me. It comes from John chapter 14, verse 6. It says, I am the way,
And the way,
the truth,
the truth,
and the life.
and the life.
No one comes to the Father
No one comes to the Father
except through me. Good. So we want to be followers of Jesus so that we can be with God. Jesus is the way that we can get that big disaster fixed so that we can be with God again. And we're learning about ways to follow Jesus. Last week, we talked about this. I don't know if you can see it, but you probably remember. And we got our little footsteps that say what? Who can tell me what that says?
Pray.
Pray.
Pray. We learned about how to pray, how to talk to God. Jesus was really good at that, and he taught his followers how to do it. Remember to be quiet unless you're answering a question. So, did we learn about that we had to have a special place to be able to pray? No. You can pray to God anywhere you are. You don't have to have a special place. Did we learn about special fancy words that you have to use to talk to God?
No.
No. No big fancy words are needed. God can understand what we're saying. He knows what's in our heart, and he just loves for us to talk to him. So we want to pray. That's what we talked about last week. Now this week, can you see what I've got on my bulletin board right here? Who can tell me what that is?
A farmhouse.
A farmhouse? Well, maybe not the house, but it is something to be on a farm. The barn. That's right. It's the barn. And who can tell me what our word down here on our footsteps says?
Share.
Share. Okay. So tonight we're going to learn about a story that Jesus told that talks about sharing, which is another way that we follow Jesus.
It's okay.
Okay.
Now, lots of times, remember to listen with your ears and be really quiet unless you're answering a question. Lots of times, Jesus would tell stories to teach people things because it made it easy for people to understand what he was talking about. And this is one of those stories found in Luke in the Bible. Luke was not one of the 12 disciples, but he was a follower of Jesus. And it tells us that a man came up to Jesus one day and he was very upset. Can you show me an upset face?
No. No.
He was very upset. He was upset with his brother because, listen with your ears, because his brother was not sharing with him with the things that their father had left for them. He was very upset and he said, Jesus, can you tell my brother to split the stuff with me? He needs to share with me. Yeah. Well, Jesus did not go talk to the brother. Instead, he talked to the man that asked him the question, and he told him a story. He said there was a man who was rich, and he had lots of land. He had a big farm. Now, I grew up on a farm, so I know a lot about farms and growing crops and things like that. And this man grew crops. He grew food crops. He would have grown grain probably in that time, back in those days. And sometimes you have a really good year and you have lots and lots of crops. And then sometimes it doesn't work so well. Ooh, we got somebody else coming in. Let me let them in real quick so they won't be missing. All right, so sometimes you have a really good year, and that's what happened to this man. He had a very, very good year. And so he had so much grain, so much crops. We don't know what kind of grain. It may have been wheat or rice or corn, or we don't know because the Bible doesn't tell us. But he had so much grain that his barn was not big enough to hold it. So I'm going to do this so you can kind of get an idea. We're going to pretend that this was his grain. This is popcorn. He probably wasn't growing popcorn, but he might have been growing corn. But I chose popcorn because you'd be able to see it. We're going to pretend that this little jar is his barn. So I'm going to start putting his crop into his barn. Uh-oh, there's a problem. Can anybody tell me what the problem is?
It's spilling.
Spilling. Why is it spilling?
Because there's too much.
He had too much. His barn was not big enough to hold the whole crop. So he had a problem. So he thought about that for a minute and he said, I know what I'll do. I'll tear down my barn. And he may have had more than one, but I'll tear down my barn and I'll build a bigger barn so that I have enough room to store my crop. Now, who thinks that was a good idea? That'd be a good idea, right? If the barn wasn't big enough, you need a bigger barn. So we're going to pretend that this is his bigger barn. This was his little barn. See, that one's bigger. So I'm going to put all that in there. I've got popcorn all over my computer and everywhere. And then I've got more of his crop. And we're going to pour it in. Oh, good. That barn was big enough. All of his crop would fit in there. So that barn was big enough. And what he did was he sat down and he said, now I can rest. I can just not have to work anymore. And I can just use this grain that I've stored up and I won't have to work anymore because I've got more than I'm going to need and I can just keep using it and whatever. So that kind of sounds like that might be a good idea, but that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, what a foolish, foolish man. For that very night, that man died. And then he couldn't use any of the grain that he had stored up. Jesus said, you don't need to be greedy and store up things on earth. You need to store up things in heaven, which means being like Jesus. Now, can anybody think of something else he could have done with this instead of building a bigger barn? I see Olive's got her hand raised, but I can't hear you, Olive, because you're still muted. You want to
Share.
What could he have done with it instead of putting it in a bigger barn?
Share.
He could have shared, couldn't he? There were plenty of people that lived close by that probably were hungry, who didn't have enough food to eat. And instead, he just said, I'll just build a bigger barn and then I won't have to work anymore. And Jesus said, that is not the best answer. It's important for us to share, especially when we have more than we even need. Okay, remember to listen and not talk unless you're answering a question. If we have more than we need, and a lot of times we do have more than we need to share with other people. And that's the lesson that Jesus was trying to teach his followers. And that's a lesson that Jesus still wants us to know about today. Can you think of things that you might share? Shout it out if you can think of something you might share with somebody else.
Toys.
Toys, good. Especially if a friend comes over to play, you want to share your toys. What else can we share with people? Food, very good. Sometimes we have collections at church where we collect lots of canned goods and share those with people that might not have enough to eat. In fact, when we have our Bible class at church, that's something that we normally do in our Bible classes. We collect canned food for people who might need help. So there's lots of things we can share. One very important thing that we can share that doesn't even take away from what we have is we can share the stories about Jesus. We can tell other people about Jesus and share about him because we want everybody to know about Jesus and to know how to follow him. Very good. You guys are good listeners. Let's talk about what our activities are for tonight. Your worksheet has big ABCs, and then it has smaller ABCs, and it has pictures that go with them. And if you can match the big letter, the big letter to the small letter, it will show you ways to share some of these items that are on this side with other people on this side. Like for instance, down here, number C is a bunch of flowers. And our little picture shows a little girl sharing those flowers with a lady. So that's just something you can color and you can match the ABCs and think about, talk about different ways. Okay, our snack tonight is Chex Mix. Now you might wonder why Miss Tanya chose Chex Mix for your snack. The reason is because it's made from grains. We were talking about the man and how he grew food. He grew grains. We don't know exactly what he grew, but to make Chex Mix, they need rice and they need corn and they need wheat, and it's got all those different kinds of grains in it. So while you're munching on that crunchy, crunchy Chex Mix after you have your dinner, or maybe even tomorrow, you can think about the man that grew crops, and he had lots of crops, but he didn't choose the best thing. The best thing would have been to share what he had instead of building a bigger barn for it. And then your craft tonight, yours is a little bit smaller than mine, but it's a game. You can color the different things on it. Mine's been colored a long time ago because I've used it lots of times. Ooh, I'm getting a funny light.
Hey.
And in the middle, it says 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have a paper clip with a little fastener. And when you get ready to play this game, you'll need something to be a marker like a penny or something like that. You can move around the board and you'll spin this in the middle.
Yes.
Kind of see mine spin and see which one it lands on. And then you can count that many spaces and you can talk about whether that would be something that would be easy to share or something that would be hard to share. Some things are real easy to share. It's real easy to share your toys. It's real easy to share your snacks. But if it's your very favorite toy, it might be hard to share that. Or if it's something that you really want for yourself, it might be hard to share that. But Jesus wants us to share. So you can play that game with mom or dad or big brother or big sister. And if you just keep it nice, you can play it different times. Tomorrow, if the weather's yucky outside and you don't get to go to school, this would be a good game to play. Talk about the different things. When you get all the way to the end, you can pray and talk to God and ask him to help you remember. All right, so that's your craft for tonight. And I think that's pretty much everything. So we've talked about that Jesus taught us how to pray. We talked about how Jesus taught us how to share. I wonder what we're going to learn about next week to be a good follower of Jesus. We'll have to come back and see. All right, I'm going to count down to count down, and everybody can unmute, and we will say goodbye to the boys and girls who might be watching online. In fact, I heard from some people this week that are watching online, and they were trying to get caught up. I thought maybe they would be on Zoom with us tonight, but they didn't make it. All right, everybody ready to say goodbye? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Bye. See you next time.
Bye.